This video is sponsored by NordVPN. Check it out via the link in the description. Also, this video is part 2 in a 2-part series. You can watch part 1 by clicking the link on the top right of your screen. At the beginning of the 1960s, libertarianism was a growing nationwide political movement. Much of this was thanks to the work of the Fee, spiritual mobilization, and Rand's objectivist movement. Unfortunately, while the objectivist movement was leading the charge, Rand's personal life was about to fall apart. Ayn Rand's affair with Nathaniel Branden had ended after the publication of Atlas Shrugged. When she tried to resume it, 2 problems presented itself. First, they were both still married. And second, there was a 25-year age difference between her and Branden. Do you see the problems here? Ayn Rand sure didn't, but Nathaniel Branden absolutely did. Not with the adultery though, because by that point he had separated from his wife and began a new affair with a young actress. Now, objectivists believe in replacing the Christian motto of judge not lest ye be judged with judge and prepare to be judged. So in that spirit, let me assure you, I'm judging. This situation couldn't last, and ended when Branden was forced to confront Rand and ask her to end her advances. Branden told Rand that he would not and could not ever be her lover again. So in response, Rand summoned him to her home, furiously condemned him, and then told him, if you have an ounce of morality left in you, an ounce of psychological health, you'll be impotent for the next 20 years, before finally slapping him 3 times. The Rand-Branden affair was over, but the consequences for the objectivist movement were just beginning. The Nathaniel Branden Institute collapsed as young students from around the nation showed up to their New York offices to vent their frustrations. Meanwhile, Rand herself stopped producing new major works. So while Ayn Rand's books continued to be read by millions of people across the country, in a way, Rand got what she wanted. The Nathaniel Branden Institute, and objectivism as a whole, was rendered impotent for the next 20 years. This was also around the same time as when spiritual mobilization was collapsing. While the Fee just wasn't as effective as it used to be. It was looking like the 1960s would be a very difficult decade for libertarianism. But before we can find out how libertarianism survived, I need to tell you something very important. This channel is the regular target of cybersecurity attacks. Every month, malicious actors pretend to be fans, potential sponsors, and even YouTube itself in an effort to get us to click on imposter links. Once clicked, these links will install viruses, steal credentials, and sometimes do even worse things to us. Content creators such as myself are not the only targets of these phishing attacks. They can hit anyone, including you. So carefully read unfamiliar links before clicking on them. Sometimes they can be just one letter off from the real thing, or disguised behind shortened URLs. This cybersecurity lesson and entire video are sponsored by NordVPN, who can help keep you and your data safe online. I always use a VPN to secure and anonymize my online activity, especially when on public Wi-Fi, and you should too. NordVPN goes further than most with unique enhanced security features like their double VPN service, where traffic is routed through 2 different VPN servers to double the encryption. Nord is offering a special deal just for you guys. Any 2-year package comes with 4 free bonus months and a 30-day money-back guarantee. So click the link in the description and pinned comment below this video, and use our exclusive promo code CallMeEzekiel to secure and anonymize your internet activity today. It's also a great way to support our channel. And now, back to the video. So the widespread failure of the libertarian right got Murray Rothbard thinking. If the right was incapable of successful political action, why not reach out to the left? After all, there was a key issue they both agreed on, ending the Vietnam War. So along with some of his old Circle Bastiat pals, Rothbard launched a new journal, Left and Right. The plan was to unite the left and right libertarians against big business and the growing American empire. It was through Left and Right that Rothbard came into contact with Murray Bookchin, Noam Chomsky, Paul Goodman, and Joan Didion. Left and Right was uniquely effective in converting both left and right-wingers to the libertarian cause. Rothbard's writings were even published in left-wing magazines. All of this was done with a tremendous air of self-aware humor. As one former Randian put it, A couple of years ago, when I was an immature kid, I was organizing and raising money for the Randian movement. But now I'm mature and working for a realistic goal: anarchist revolution. Rothbard particularly delighted in attacking William F. Buckley's brand of militant anti-communist conservatism, the kind that likes to complain about how they're losing to leftism while refusing to actually do anything about it, but will absolutely work with the left if it means getting to start more foreign wars. So as the 60s came to a close, libertarianism managed to regain its footing, but not before two peculiar incidents in St. Louis and New York. The year is 1969. The place is St. Louis. The event is the Young Americans for Freedom National Labor Day Convention. At the time, YAF was the largest and most important conservative student organization, but it played a key role in the libertarian movement as well, acting as the primary outlet for libertarian activism. A solid 20% of YAF's members identified as libertarians. This made sense since many libertarians are minted out of disaffected young conservatives. They often join the conservative movement with a youthful lust for freedom, only to be disappointed and crushed under the weight of war, big business, and social conformity. This split was represented by YAF's two factions: the conservatives, or traditionalists, called trads, and the libertarians, or radicals, called rads, or sometimes lazy fairies by their conservative rivals, a play on laissez-faire. Against the advice of Rothbard, who suggested that the libertarians found their own student organizations, the rads dreamed of one day taking over YAF from the inside. But it was not to be. This pro-freedom development was most unwelcome to the YAF higher-ups, who wanted the organization to be in the style of William F. Buckley's conservatism. YAF was purging every libertarian delegation it could find. The libertarians had to respond, and they knew exactly how. This was the height of the Vietnam War. That war, and especially the draft, were a key point of contention between the trads and rads, so during the nomination speeches for chair, a libertarian got up onto the stage, presumably shouted, "Hey nerds, look at this!" and proceeded to burn a draft card in front of the conservative audience. The trads lost their shit and rushed the stage. The rads jumped up to defend their comrades, but as always, they were outnumbered. And frankly, what are a bunch of weak, scrawny libertarians gonna do against large, chatly conservatives? It was a slaughter, forcing the libertarians to hide in their hotel rooms. But the conservatives didn't stop. They formed up into gangs, roaming the halls of the hotel looking for errant libertarians to beat the crap out of. The rads lost the battle, and failed to take over YAF, but this defeat bonded the young libertarians closely together. They all exchanged contact information, and remained in close touch since. Many would go on to found the Libertarian Party. Many of them stayed in touch via the Libertarian Zine movement that was exploding during this period. One of the publications that survived this era was the Rand-oriented Reason, which lives on today as the somewhat milquetoast Reason magazine. As the conservative-libertarian alliance fell apart, Rothbard continued to push his left-right alternative. This movement attracted libertarians from all corners. One of these new followers described the experience of meeting Rothbard like this: "When I first met Murray, I pictured a guy like Huey Newton, with a matching gun and spear. And here he was, this little fat guy who kept giggling maniacally." This new gathering of libertarians called itself the Radical Libertarian Alliance, with a slogan of "War is murder, taxation is theft, conscription is slavery, government is chaos." So in October of 1969, just a few months after trads and rads rioted in St. Louis, Rothbard decided to hold the first libertarian conference over Columbus Day weekend in New York's Hotel Diplomat. It doubled expectations, with between 200 and 300 attendees. Leftists and rightists both descended on the event as an anti-war riot began to brew outside. But just like with YAF, this conference did not go as the libertarians had hoped. This conference is a centerpiece of Jerome Tucci's libertarian cult classic, It Usually Begins with Ayn Rand. I should warn you, however, that Jerome Tucci is full of shit and takes considerable liberties with the truth. I wouldn't even call this a memoir, more like self-insert historical fiction, but everything it says is in the spirit of actual events, many of which he personally witnessed. And besides, this thing is so damn funny that I fully endorse every fabrication. Let's enjoy one together. Quoting Too Chilly, Columbus Day weekend, 1969. A libertarian convention, the first of its kind, was sponsored by the Radical Libertarian Alliance. Now that we had all of these homeless right-wing radicals on our hands, we had to give them a place to rest their heads. If we waited too long, a sense of alienation might set in, and drive them back to the motherly arms of Bill Buckley, or the fatherly caress of Ayn Rand. Too Chilly goes on to describe the lead-up to the event, and says that the opening went quite smoothly. Until, quote, suddenly, a voice rang out. "Mary's destroying the coalition!" Who? What? What the hell was going on? We hadn't even gotten started yet. People were running out into the corridor. Necks were craning as everyone rose on his toes to get a better look at what was going on. For Christ's sake, it was true. The coalition was in jeopardy. Mary, that sociopathic was beating the shit out of a love child. Mary was all the worst aspects of women's liberation rolled up into 180 pounds of flaming terror. Mary wasn't big. She was gross. She had a pair of shoulders on her that made a linebacker look like a 90-pound weakling. She had thick black hair that stuck out 14 inches in all directions. If she stared too long at you with those fiery red eyes, you could feel your nuts roasting between your thighs. She was Ayn Rand on a 2-week binge. She was a superheroine shot through with 1600 volts of electricity. To complete the image, she dressed herself all in black. There was Mary, over in the corridor with this emaciated love child from Pennsylvania, slamming him back and forth against the wall and screaming at him. It seemed this dreary-eyed communalist had been regaling some objectivists with stories about his, quote, extended family in Pennsylvania, telling them how it was out there in the countryside, away from the factories and automobile exhaust. Everybody loved everybody, and they spent their days making sandals and weaving straw into backing for rocking chairs. They swam together in the Raw in a pond behind the farmhouse, and wrote poetry in the evenings before climbing into a big mat on the floor and fondling one another. They had loved being off in the woods by themselves, away from technology and civilization and greedy profiteers. Greedy profiteers! Mary's eyes lit up, and hatred shot out of her eyes the way sparks do from a toy machine gun. This anti-life collectivist was attacking greed? This puny little altruist was bad-mouthing the profit system? Mary could contain herself no longer. It was at this point she stepped forward and grabbed the anti-mind second-hander by his bony shoulders and started slamming him back and forth against the wall. Greed? Greed? Greed's what makes the world go round, you degenerate altruist son of a bitch! You filthy little whim worshipper! You collectivist creep! Personally, I don't know what Too Chilly was upset about. I'd be having a great time. But it doesn't matter what I'd have felt, because the whole thing continued to fall apart from there, until finally, leftist agitators convinced half of the audience to join the riot outside against Fort Dix. By the end, Too Chilly reports that Mary had returned from the riot, suffering from the effects of tear gas, and asking, "Where the f*** were you?" over and over. As Too Chilly describes it, "We're sorry it happened, Mary, but you must have known they would retaliate before you did. What did you expect from them anyway? Those soldiers out there, all dressed up in helmets and fatigues, all just as frightened as you are, all trapped in this system just like anybody else." Mary then says, "Where the f*** were you?" And then it was all over. She caved in on herself and fell over like a rag doll. Jets of salty tears issued forth from the fiery coals, and rivulets ran down her cheeks onto her objectivist $ lapel pins. Don't cry, Mary. We'll get the ones responsible for it one of these days. But you don't fight atom bombs with knives and sticks, Mary. David and Goliath was a fluke. Nixon, Agnew, and LBJ, and all of the rest of them are the enemy. Not some bunch of weekend soldiers who'd rather be anywhere else, doing anything else but guarding a military base on a Sunday afternoon. We'll get the real enemy, Mary, but not with knives or rocks or stones. That's their way. That's what they're hoping for. By the 1970s, Rothbard decided that left-right wasn't working and canned the project. Thus ended the first great attempt at libertarian unity. One of the libertarian movement's greatest failures was the creation of the withholding system for the income tax. This is where employers deduct the income tax directly from their employees' wages and pay it to the government. Libertarians despise this system, both because it means the government is taxing people's money before it even enters their possession, and also because it hides how much money the government is taking from people. Much of this was a result of the libertarian economist Milton Friedman, who pushed for the withholding tax while a part of the US Treasury's Tax Research Division. Milton Friedman said he had no apologies for it, and the libertarian movement has never forgiven him for it. But now, during the Vietnam War, Friedman got a chance to redeem himself. By the 1970s, the draft had become tremendously unpopular, and the Nixon administration wanted to end it. But there was a major roadblock. Was a volunteer army even possible? Could the United States government achieve its geopolitical objectives without slave soldiers? The government wanted a sure answer, not an experiment. Milton Friedman would give them their answer. Friedman was a member of the 15-man Gates Commission, who would be key to making this decision. At first, the committee was 5 for, 5 against, and 5 undecided. Friedman was a leading voice in favor of the volunteer army. When Vietnam troop commander William Westmoreland announced that he was not interested in leading an army of mercenaries, Friedman replied by asking him, "Would you rather command an army of slaves?" Westmoreland countered, "I don't like to hear our patriotic draftees referred to as slaves." To which Friedman shot back, "I don't like to hear our patriotic volunteers referred to as mercenaries." Soon, Friedman's arguments won out, and a volunteer army was created according to a slightly watered-down version of Friedman's plan. Nixon credits his decision to the existence of that plan, without which he would not have considered the volunteer army to have been possible. It's because of Milton Friedman that the government can steal your money before you even get to touch it. But it's also because of Milton Friedman that they can't also kidnap you from your home and send you to die in a foreign war. Milton Friedman is also the father of the anarcho-capitalist theorist David Friedman, who wrote The Machinery of Freedom. His anarcho-capitalism is not based on ethics or natural rights like Rothbard, but on consequentialism, believing that regardless of its morality, anarcho-capitalist society will do the most good for the most people. Libertarianism regained a lot of momentum in the 1970s and 80s. Among its greatest successes was the founding of the Libertarian Party in 1972. This was the handiwork of Dave Nolan, who had grown disillusioned with YAF even before the St. Louis debacle. The party met with considerable success in its first years. Its public announcement was met with quite a lot of coverage, with even the New York Times giving it a positive review. As is their nature, the Libertarians were bound to select an eccentric first presidential candidate, the analytical philosopher John Hospers, who was a former associate of Ayn Rand. His running mate was Tony Nathan. In spite of only appearing on the ballot in Washington and Colorado, they managed to secure a faithless elector for themselves, who voted for them largely in protest of Nixon. This also happens to make Tony Nathan the first woman to receive an electoral college vote in US history. Unfortunately, the anarchist and limited government factions quickly began infighting, which was cleverly ended by the adoption of the 1974 Dallas Accords. It stated that the Libertarian Party was an alliance between anarchists and minarchists. In practice, it meant that the party platform could never include support for any government action. It could only list government actions that it opposed. That way, both factions could work together without compromising their principles. After their first presidential election, the Libertarian Party would reliably get hundreds of thousands of votes for its presidential candidates, and in the last 3 presidential elections, multiple millions. But not all libertarians were happy with the creation of the party. Samuel Edward Konkin III was among them. He believed that participating in the state, even to subvert it, was a crime, that non-participation was preferable, and to facilitate that, he invented agorism. The idea was to intentionally create black markets free from government oversight and taxation. Eventually, this black market would grow until it took over the whole society, displacing the government. Modern conservatives have a much watered-down version of this idea called the parallel economy, the main difference being that they still believe in government oversight and taxes. Key to agorism is the differentiation between black and red markets. Both types are illegal, but black markets offer goods and services that do not violate libertarian ethics, while red markets offer goods and services that do violate libertarian ethics. Agorists support black markets and oppose red ones. Similar to agorism were various attempts at so-called libertarian Zionism, wherein one or several libertarians would try to find a government-free zone such as international waters and create a libertarian community there. Most would fail to get off the ground, while the more successful attempts were destroyed by various governments under one pretense or another. The libertarian movement continued to gain ground in the 70s when Hayek won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1974, followed by Friedman in 76. Other people and movements influenced by libertarian thought are Thomas Sowell, the precious metal-obsessed Goldbugs, and Alan Greenspan, an associate of Ayn Rand and chairman of the Federal Reserve for 20 years. Meanwhile, Randy Barnett was advancing anarchism with a unique argument. He said that there were only two tiny changes he wanted to make to the world, the kinds of changes that everyone, everywhere would agree on. 1. You can't make your customers pay for your services by force. And 2. You can't drive your competitors out of business by force. If you propose these ideas to the average person, they'd certainly agree with them. But those two principles would abolish all taxation, state policing, military, courts, legislatures, and everything else the state does because they're paid for by force, and usually monopolized. Libertarianism is also a major theme of the tremendously popular science fiction novelist Robert Heinlein, who's most famous for his Starship Troopers, Stranger in a Strange Land, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, and a ton of other science fiction literature. In his The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, he coined the libertarian slogan Tannstaffel, or there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. By the 1980s and 90s, libertarianism became an increasingly recognizable movement across the country, but many of its founders would not live to see it get that far. Isabel Patterson died in 1961, Rose Wilder Lane in 68, and Mises in 73. Leonard Read, who founded the Foundation for Economic Education, died in 1983. While Rand's work continues to be read around the country and the world to this day, she remained rather reclusive since the fall of the NBI. But whenever she did make a public appearance, she always sold out her events, and she always left her audiences mesmerized. Rand passed away in 1982. Rothbard continued to fight for the libertarian cause until the day he died in 1995. Among his many lasting legacies was the founding of the Mises Institute with Lew Rockwell and Ron Paul. Rothbard is also one of the primary influences on the modern-day anarcho-capitalist philosopher and helicopter enjoyer Hans Herman Hoppe. Libertarian activism continues today in many forms, be it in DC think tanks like the Cato Institute, the Libertarian Party, or in the Free State Project, wherein large numbers of libertarians all move to the state of New Hampshire in order to democratically take over its government and install a libertarian regime. The FI also continues to operate to this day, while the Bitcoin and wider crypto community are thoroughly enmeshed in libertarian philosophy and Austrian economics. Meanwhile, the Libertarian Party managed to gain over 1 million votes for its presidential candidate in the last 3 elections, with over 4 million votes in 2016. While not nearly enough to win the presidency, it certainly indicates that there's growing dissatisfaction with the existing political parties, and growing demand for a radical alternative. Libertarianism is a uniquely American movement, born out of a combination of anarchism, classical philosophy, radical economics, and a longing for freedom. Its influence over the minds of men continues to grow, so there's no doubt that whatever the future holds, much of it will be driven by men who call themselves libertarians. And that's the history of libertarianism. Much of this 2-part series was based on Brian Doherty's excellent Radicals for Capitalism, a freewheeling history of the modern American libertarian movement. I linked to where you can pick it up, and to the rest of our sources in the description below this video. This video was funded by a secret society of radical anarcho-capitalists as a part of their quest to overthrow the government and create their ANCAP utopia, including Handsome AJ and Josiah. And by this video's sponsor, NordVPN. Click the link in the description and use our exclusive promo code CallMeEzekiel to make your 2-year package come with 4 free bonus months and a 30-day money-back guarantee. Links to where you can support us directly are also in the description. Like, comment, and subscribe for more. I'll see you in the next one.
Y soy el general ladrón de tu esfuerzo.